Classroom of the Elite Volume 0. Probably the most important piece of information in order to understand how Ayanokoji became the person he is today. Now, this will be a bit different from my usual scripted videos. I'll just be speaking off the top and we'll see where it goes. There's a lot of gaps in information, but I think slowly as we see Ayanokoji take these steps to help Class D ascend to Class A, we can learn a bit more what's going on in his head. I think the strongest indication is actually within the first episode, when he has his first internal monologue of what is equality. Ayanokoji clearly outlines that equality is a false god, and most of us go through life denying the fact that we live in this meritocracy. And that's why at the end of Volume 1, when he confronts Chabashira's sensei, he says, "Is Japanese society inherently fair?" Which the obvious answer is that it's not. No society is fair. There will always be systemic inequalities that a lot of people will never be able to break from. That's life. If you nurture yourself and discipline yourself, you have the opportunity to ascend to greater heights. All humans are born premature. We have to take the steps to crawl, then walk. But that also implies that there is this quality for limitless potential. We all have that capacity. Society may in fact be a meritocracy, but if you go through the steps, you can ascend. And what's interesting about Ayanokoji is that he's already made it to the top. He's already tapped into his potential, and yet he purposely represses it. It's a sort of mental trauma that he's been carrying with him since his experience in the White Room. Ayanokoji was a demon, an ironically perfect human who stood at the top at the expense of others. He experienced horrors most of us can't even fathom, watching those he grew up with die or fall by the wayside while he continued to ascend. In a sense, we can understand why his eyes are dead, his face is deadpan, and he's constantly complacent, never wanting to show people or reveal his true nature. And that's because every time he succeeded, it was at the detriment of others. When you stand at the top, all you get is loneliness. That's why many people seek out a quote-unquote normal life. And that's why the Tokyo Advanced Nurturing High School was the perfect place for Ayanokoji. He could be free, and freedom for Ayanokoji is normalcy. But it's not that easy moving on from your past life. And that's why Ayanokoji is constantly pulling the strings. In reality, it's all he knows. And in the sports festival, we see that the clearest when Ayanokoji goes out of his way to contradict himself. He garners attention, he races the president, and people start noticing him. But it's almost like a joke. Ryuen is trying to snuff out the mastermind of Class D, and to him, Ayanokoji seems almost too obvious. He's always there, he's always in the background, and it seems like he does nothing. He just seems like a background character, and that's why most people disregard him. So we have to question, what really is Ayanokoji's true motivation? What greater purpose is he trying to garner? Well, it all goes back to the White Room. As we know, it was his father's institution. He was the one who set up these conditions that forced many children to die at the wayside. It broke Ayanokoji to the point that he doesn't know how to express emotion. He's more machine than man, and all he understands is information and data. Ayanokoji proposes to Horikita what is the strongest weapon that humanity has to offer. The most commonplace answer would be violence, and there's some truth in that, but when you do the steps, you realize that violence is just a reaction to the initial action. The strongest weapon humanity has to offer is information. And that's why Ayanokoji rarely acts, because he understands that if he can soak up as much information as possible, then he can defeat his enemies. Coincidentally, Kushida is the perfect example of this circumstance, and what happened to her middle school class exemplifies the power of information. Kushida is someone who can easily gain the trust of others, and because of that, she can learn their secrets, and she can use those secrets to turn people against one another if she sees fit. And that's why communication became the major difference when it came to warfare. Those who were able to relay information the fastest usually won the war. If it's one thing Ayanokoji has come to understand, it's to remember to keep a clear head during the difficult times. If you maintain your composure, you always make the right decision. And one thing Ayanokoji is is composed, to abandon his humanity and be a monster so he can make massive changes. And I think that's what Ayanokoji desires most of all, to be a harbinger of change because he can do things others cannot. He's someone who went out of his way to sacrifice his art, and he accepted the burdens of doing the unspeakable. He became a demon, and that's because to rise above monsters, you have to abandon your humanity. To defeat monsters like Ryuin or his father, Ayanokoji became a monster. He only views people as tools to success of his greater goal. The only ally he considers is Kei, and even then, she's just another object. And that's because Ayanokoji understands at his core that if you can't let it go, then it was never worth holding on to. He's a god amongst men, a demon who stood at the top, and that will never change. He will and always be a puppet master pulling the strings. That's how Ayanokoji will garner change. That's how he will bring Class D to Class A, and finally defeat his father.